Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Fine. I'm very excited to be live. Sorry about that delay, but I'm here and we are officially live. So I am going to just give me a second so I can make sure I'm seeing everyone's questions. Let's see. I'm just going to give everybody some time to come in before I start. I'm just not necessarily seeing things. Hold on. Maybe someone can just send a test question in. That way I can actually make sure I am doing this correctly. Can someone send in a test comment? That way I can see if I'm actually seeing this correctly because I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now I see things. Hello. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. So, just to get started, I'm going to give a brief intro about who I am, and hopefully, we can, um, dive into some topics about private practice and what I do at To The Point Nutrition. First of all, I just want to thank Build Up Dietitians for actually having me here today. I'm always anxious to help my fellow dietitians or RDs to be in regards to what it actually means to start a private practice and not just start one, but like actually, spend it's not so easy, in my opinion, running a private practice because we go to school to really exercise our minds of nutrition and health and wellness, and most often we go in with the mindset of we want to try and help, whether it's certain a person or maybe certain populations, and we're very interested in nutrition, but what we aren't necessarily interested in is all of the business and the back end administrative work that goes into running a private practice. And a lot of that I found has just come with time and come with experience. And it's been a major learning curve. I'll be completely honest with you. I feel like every year, probably every 6 months, I am just learning something new about the business end of things. So, just to give you some background, I'm originally from New York, and I shouldn't even say originally, I am just from New York. I'm still in New York. I lived in Manhattan. I'm now in the suburbs. I've got 2 kids at home. And I started my private practice, To The Point Nutrition, back in 2013. So, if anyone doesn't necessarily know what my practice is now, it's a practice that specializes in nutrition for dancers. So, my background is that of a dancer myself. I have been a lifelong classical dancer, so this is mainly ballet and contemporary based, but really more so ballet based. And I've always been a dancer my whole life, but about, I would say maybe at this point, it's like 13 years ago, I kind of burnt myself out because I fell into some disordered eating behaviors. Lucky for me, though, I was able to see that as a very unsustainable road. And not that it was all unsustainable, it was, but it also really drove my passion away from dance and away from ballet. And at the same time, I was simultaneously getting very interested in nutrition and health. And in hindsight, this is very common, what you see with, especially with dancers or maybe athletes that become very highly interested in nutrition and in wellness. Very often you see that simultaneously paralleling with the coming of disordered eating. But I didn't know that at the time. At the time, I was like, oh, I'm super interested in food and super interested in nutrition, and from dancing. I loved dancing, but I just knew I was exhausted, obviously, because I wasn't fueling my body adequately. I was also dancing like 7, 8 hour days, and I wasn't going on. I didn't really know at the time what it was. I didn't really know much about like disordered eating behaviors and what that meant, especially because disordered eating behaviors are somewhat normalized in our culture, in our world. I just thought like, okay, well, maybe I need to take 2 steps back in order to move forward down the road with my dance career. And that's when I really switched gears, went to school for nutrition, clinical nutrition. I went to NYU, my undergrad and my grad, and I eventually did their dietetic internship there as well. And I eventually worked at NYU Langone. So I really did pretty much everything on the NYU track. I absolutely loved their program. Very supportive. Really just, I walked away with so much from the NYU program. I loved it. And then alongside all of this, I just started what became a passion for nutrition and for, the science of nutrition and the science of food really started to bloom and grow for me. And that's when I just decided to go like head first into this idea of being a dietitian, a registered dietitian. And I loved it. I loved everything about what this idea of this field was. And fortunately, I was able to pursue that educationally. And, it led me to a position as a clinical dietitian at NYU Langone. And I happen to have loved my time there. But it was short-lived because I, at the same time, started to burn myself out a little bit and just start really missing a community and that I had my original passion for, and that was the dance community. And I had always been dancing alongside while I was studying in dietetics. I never stopped. I was in Manhattan, and that's really the heart of dance. So there were so many opportunities for me to pick up freelance work and even just taking classes here and there. So I never stopped dancing. But I really missed being immersed in that community, and I wanted to figure out a way that I could. At that point, I had realized what had happened to me, 6 years prior, was that I burnt myself out because of disordered eating habits, and I wanted to work with the same dancers that had the same struggles that I had 7 years prior. And the crazy thing about it is that like 98% of the dance world has those same. There is still a major gap in education for dancers in regards to nutrition, but not just nutrition. Especially when I should fast forward a little bit. Now I'm also a counselor of intuitive eating. So there's just like a major gap of what dancers are being educated about in regards to like classic sports nutrition, but then also the idea of building sustainable habits that aren't centered around like obsessive nutrition information or like obsessively trying to, strive for this perfect picture of health, let's just say, or performance nutrition. So it's really a matter of where I've come to now, like fast forward 12 years, it's really this balance of like, how can we encourage that a population like dancers get in what they need? They're athletes, they're utilizing their body as athletes, and they need more and different types of recommendations than other maybe standard populations. But how do we do that without promoting obsessive behaviors around food? And I should just like back up. I'm a perfectionist. I feel like one also see this as a recurring theme in the dietetics world too. So there's just a ton of parallels between like the dance world and the dietetics world. And my own perfectionism with food is what landed me in disordered eating habits. So I've had to really learn how to educate dancers like myself, who I was 10 years ago, how to learn how to fuel my body in a way that's going to support my performance needs, but do so in a way that's also going to support my mental health and not say promote any restrictions of any types of food, and the fact that like we can actually enjoy all foods and still be a successful professional dancer in a top tier dance company, I should say. So that's like the rundown of what To The Point Nutrition has become over, I would say, it started in 2013. So it's like a little bit less than a decade ago, and it's really evolved since then. One thing that I've felt with private practice is the idea of making space for, I should say that I felt as a private practice dietitian, is the idea of making space that things will evolve. And I've had to come to terms with this in of itself. When I look back on what I was teaching and educating back in 2013, sometimes I actually cringe. And I've realized how much I have evolved, both as, a person and as a dietitian and as an educator for this population. So I think we have to be patient with ourselves as clinicians. If you are interested in pursuing private practice, be patient with yourself, like that this process is an ever evolving process. And we know that for nutrition in general and for science in general, it is always ever evolving. Science and research is always ever evolving. And to, the one beautiful thing about being a dietitian is that we are held to this expectation that we have to pursue continuing education every few years. And the reason is because we can't sit stagnant in ideas that could potentially be wrong or outdated. So it's extremely important that we view that insight as well in regards to our own private practice. Oh, let's see. Oh no, you're breaking up a bit. Not sure if you'll be able to do anything about that. You know what? Let me see if I can change locations real quick, and maybe that will help. Otherwise, I could also potentially switch to my phone. So just give me 1 second. I'm moving. And then let me know if this gets better, or Leah, let me know if you just want to restart on my phone, because that might be better connection. Okay, so just let me know what you think. I'm looking at the comments as well. Okay, so yeah, so that's kind of the rundown of where I've come over the past about 10 years with To The Point Nutrition. And since then, I've learned how to really make jumps in my work in regards to, I wasn't always specializing in dancers. I started To The Point Nutrition with the idea that I wanted to work with dancers, but it was very scary, for lack of a better phrase, to think of the idea of niching down and working only with dancers, because I was just worried that was going to limit me. Okay, good. So far, so good. Good. I was worried that it was going to limit me in regards to, from an entrepreneurial perspective. I didn't want to be limited in the amount of profit I can make, honestly, and doing this full time as well. So that was important. I didn't want to be limited in the amount of patients that I could see, because I was just worried that zoning in on one niche would, like I said, limit that. But it actually turned out to be the opposite. And I feel like even when I hear people say this, it could still be scary to niche down. And not everybody has to niche down. This isn't like finding a niche is not necessarily the ticket to a very successful private practice. I think it can work either way. I'm just giving you my experience. And I felt that I benefited from niching down, and it was mainly because of my messaging. So this is messaging on my website, messaging on my Instagram specifically. I would say Instagram is now probably where I will get 98% of clients, which is a lot. That's a lot of clients from there. So my personal messaging had to be more specific, and it was easier for me to do that when I said, okay, you know what, I have to do this full force. I would say for a good 5 or 6 years, I've always been a certified specialist in sports nutrition. So for a good 5 to 6 years, I always also saw just regular athletes, whether track runners, any type of athlete, honestly. And I felt that I always had one foot in each world, in the dance world, but then I was also at the same time trying to make my messaging more generalized so it wouldn't leave out other populations. Wasn't until I said, this is back in 2017 or 2018, where I was I need to just do this full force. I remember sitting in with a client and being just in my head being God, this is what I love to do. I love speaking with dancers, because this dancer was me 10 years ago. And this is who I'm talking to. I'm talking to 17-year-old Rachel Portnoff. That was my maiden name. And once I did that, once I made that jump, it made things so much easier, because then I knew over on Instagram, I was able to talk to myself. That's who, if I'm on stories talking, I'm not thinking about the dancers who are following me. I'm thinking about who I was when I was 17 years old and what I needed to hear at the time. And since doing that, it has truly, I would say, blossomed my practice. Okay, so let's see. We got a question. Do you find dancers trust dietitians for nutrition advice, or do you find this population is more likely to trust celebrities or wellness coaches? That's a really good question. And I think the answer to this question would have been different 5 years ago than it is now. The dance world has, I would say, in the past 2 years, done a very good job at pushing forward in regards to where recommendations are coming from, and we're seeing just a much stronger push from like the dance medicine professionals in regards to getting out there. And by the way, I think Instagram has helped a lot with this as well, because we have a lot of dance medicine professionals on the Instagram. We're all connected. It's also a pretty small community of dance medicine professionals, and I think we've all been doing such a great job of like getting the messaging out there that dancers need to hear. So I think more now than prior, we are seeing that dancers know that a dietitian is the one to go to. With that being said, there's still a ton of like coaches, not that, so I don't want to blanket statement health coaching as something that is not necessarily a great thing, because there are health coaches out there that do promote very sustainable habits, and I don't have any issues with that. But I will say that there are a lot of health coaches out there that do specialize with dancers, and I think that again it depends on the health coach, just like it depends on the dietitian, honestly, just to make sure that the advice that they are giving are sustainable habits, and that we're not getting, like you said in your question, information from just Dr. Google, or just like this aura of like health and wellness, which actually just masks disordered eating. So that's really important. And like I said, it's not a blanket statement that goes against health coaches. I don't have anything against health coaches at all, actually. It's just a matter of, are those habits that are being promoted sustainable? And this goes for health coaches and dietitians. So luckily, I would say the dance world is doing a great job in regards to that. Dancers are more often than not relying on registered dietitians and licensed professionals for their advice. So that was a great question. Let's see, any other questions that I can answer? In regards to niching down, I would love to hear more perspective from other dietitians who haven't niched down, to be honest with you. I think that a lot of dietitians are trying to niche down now, which is great. But I also can see how that can be a little bit nerve-wracking for dietitians who haven't yet dived into private practice and want to. It can seem like, well, what is my niche going to be? The biggest advice I can give you is, well, choose something that's personal to you, if that's possible, because that is, again, in my opinion, it all comes down to your messaging and who you're talking to, and utilizing social media. Social media is incredibly important for private practice these days. We can't fight it. It's annoying, don't get me wrong. Even though I'm very active on Instagram, I will say it is annoying because it's very time consuming, and that time is not necessarily seen, if that makes any sense. It's a lot of like back end work type of stuff. But that being said, it's also free marketing, so very important that we take advantage of that. Other pieces of advice I can give for any dietitians that are considering private practice would be to really think about starting a website sooner than later and just building your presence on the internet. That's important just for searchability for people looking for dietitians, and this is what could be argued why a niche is important, because most often someone's going to probably type into Google, looking for a nutritionist who helps dancers. Well, in my perspective, I want to come up soon on a Google search for that. And that's where niching down could benefit. Let's see, there's another valid. So were there resources that I found helpful? I'll be honest, starting my business back in 2013, social media was very much around, but it definitely wasn't where it's at now. So I didn't necessarily utilize resources to start my business. I actually never used a business coach or anything like that. I kind of just took notice of, what other professionals were doing, and really drum up a lot of ideas in regards to my messaging. I know I keep saying that, but I think it really boils down to your messaging and who you're trying to attract to. And for me, it was always the dance population. One thing that I started with and I was able to do was get connected with a lot of dance studios. I was also, like I said, living in Manhattan at the time. And there's countless amounts of dance studios in there. So I was doing a ton of workshops, and honestly at no cost. So I was able to do this while I was working at the hospital. I would give some workshops. I also, from those workshops, was able to get some actual dance clients here and there. And then it really just snowballed, and like a reputation was built. I was also eventually started writing a lot for some writing outlets that are pretty well known in the dance world, like Dance Magazine is an example. So that's also helped a lot. But I do know that today, unlike almost 10 years ago, there's a lot of great resources and a lot of helpful business coaches that are available for RDs to Bs and dietitians who are looking to make that step into private practice. And I would say if you really don't, if you don't know where to start, then that's probably the best investment that you can make, is working with perhaps a business coach who can help get you started in regards to what your messaging is going to be, and creating helpful perhaps posts for Instagram, learning how to brand yourself, and keeping your brand in theme so that you don't come off confusing to people. And I think, by the way, that also kind of, in my opinion, goes back to the niche. Before I niched down to only dancers, I found some of my messaging to be a little bit confusing. It's like, on one hand, am I working with dancers who have disordered eating habits, or am I working with athletes who need to bulk up for whatever reason that might be? So my messaging got very confusing, and that's when I was like, okay, well, I need to really decide what I'm doing. And that was what I had a true passion for, and that was working with dancers or other performing artists in regards to disordered eating and making sure they're building sustainable habits. And that's also when I really dove into the idea of intuitive eating. That's a really good question. Eating disorders are a major common problem in the dance community. As of now, the only special training I have is with intuitive eating, which I find to be very beneficial within eating disorder recovery. Most often, if there is a dancer who is struggling with an eating disorder or severe disordered eating, my work is always alongside within, I should say, an interdisciplinary team that often involves other clinicians as well. So medical doctors, always a mental health therapist, sometimes a psychiatrist. We're always working together as part of a team. And if a dancer does not necessarily have that team, then I will refer out and help them create and build that team if it's more of an outpatient setting. So yes, I have created a referral network with other MDs and counselors, for sure. Any other potential questions? We have about 5 minutes left. And let's see if there's anything else I left out. I would say that other important things when it comes to private practice is really learning how to brand yourself, and making that, again, your voice. It took me years. That's another thing I was kind of alluding to before in regards to allowing for the journey of an evolving private practice, because your voice can change, and what you are learning and standing behind, this can change over time as well. So really, it's taken me, I honestly think, years to develop my own personal voice over, let's just say, Instagram, for example, where I know what my stance is with certain things, and and helping to educate dancers in the masses, and then of course dancers who work with me one-on-one. I also have experience with taking insurance. I will say, though, post-COVID, I'm finding it much more difficult to accept insurance, especially because of telemedicine, and a lot of insurers aren't necessarily quite there yet in regards to their coverage with telemedicine. So for the most part, I'm actually considering stopping accepting insurance, but I'm literally in the process of doing this now. But that's just been my experience, is that COVID really changed a lot in regards to insurance. So the questions coming in about is like, what is the priority of nutrients and concerns for dancers? So the thing with dancers mainly is that they have increased needs all around across the board, because they are athletes and they're using their body as athletes. So like specific nutrients, iron, calcium, vitamin D, the macros, carbs, protein, and fat. Dancers are usually very busy throughout the day, and they have higher needs than the average population. So actually getting in enough throughout the day is usually the biggest challenge, and what I'm constantly working with dancers on. So that involves, making more substantial meals and snacks and consistency with meals and snacks throughout the day, really focusing on balance instead of just like grabbing something here and there, but actually making a more substantial experience around food. And then, of course, making sure there's no restrictive food rules, because that's also very common in a sport like dance or an art like dance, where body aesthetics unfortunately have a very large role in the art. We're trying to change this, to be honest with you, as a community, but there is no doubt on huge amounts of pressure. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. Huge amounts of pressure in regards to body aesthetics for dancers. So we're constantly having to work on making sure that disordered eating behaviors don't necessarily begin. So we've got about 2 more minutes left. Are there any other questions about maybe working with dancers or private practice? Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to come on here and talk about To The Point Nutrition and my work with dancers and dance populations. You can find me on Instagram. I'm at To The Point Nutrition. That's point with an E. So To The Point with an E, Nutrition. I'm also here on Facebook at To The Point Nutrition. I've got 2 websites. So Point Nutrition, and that's pointnutrition with an E.com, is like my services website. So you'll find all of the different services I offer dancers, from guides, ebooks, courses. I've got a whole summer dance intensive as well. It's something that dancers usually do every summer in regards to making sure they're building sustainable habits while going off to their summer dance intensives, which happen to be like very intense training camps. Think of it like that for dancers. So that's where you'll find pointnutrition.com. And then on dancenutrition.com, this is my blog. This is where I write weekly articles for dancers. I have a bunch of free downloadable resources for them, free courses as well. So this is more of like a free resource site for dancers. I would say the biggest myth dancers have about nutrition would be usually around carbs. A lot of dancers fear carbs when in fact that's a primary fuel source for a dancer's body, and what's really going to help them elevate their performance. But so often we see them limited, and that's when we see dancers higher risk for injuries, higher risk for feeling tired and fatigued, which is not something a dancer can necessarily afford to feel when they've got like hours of rehearsals coming up. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I'm sorry that there was a little bit of connectivity issues in the beginning. I hope you were able to hear me. But you know where to find me. I'm at To The Point Nutrition or dancenutrition.com, Instagram, To The Point Nutrition. So you can feel free to message me and reach out anytime. It was a pleasure being here. Bye.